Hi guys. Now today we're going to concentrate for our last class on the ending of the novel and also the theme of discrimination. Okay, so a lot of people when they're reading the end of this particular novel, they kind of think themselves, okay, it's maybe a little bit too neat, essentially, in that it's a kind of we'd say, a very positive, uplifting end to the novel. I mean, it's not perfect, but some people would say it's not particularly realistic or convincing. Other people would say, well, actually, it is. And that Kasienka herself is not perfect after all. You know, she's very human, but at least she's relatively happy and content at the end of the novel. She's in a better place, essentially, and she's more confident about herself and her abilities. So if we think about one of the final chapters is entitled Metamorphosis, which literally just means a change, essentially, here. And this is where she confronts Claire, then the bully. And remember, of course, that she says very specifically then how she steps close to her and whispers in a language I think she'll understand. So she's being very definite here. Why don't you just piss off? So the other girls, of course, giggle, and then Claire is just left there dumbfounded, essentially. So it's a moment of triumph for Kasienka, but it doesn't tip over into arrogance. Okay, she's just making a simple point. I don't care about your opinion. You're not that important. So she's kind of emphasizing to Claire, of course, that she has that inner confidence now. She doesn't need to listen to Claire or anybody else's opinion of her at this particular point. Okay, and she says then simply, Claire's power dissolves. Very important there. So she doesn't have power over her. She can't intimidate and humiliate her anymore. Okay, the chapter entitled Forgiveness is very important because that's looking at the relationship then, of course, between Kasienka and her mother then. Okay, and remember that she has won the trophy. And that's very, very important in proving to herself, of course, that she can actually succeed, that she is good at something. And this is her forte as such then. Okay, so when she comes home then with the trophy, her mother says very simply, it wasn't your fault, Kasienka. So essentially that's an apology from her mother then, kind of emphasizing that she was the one at fault and she should have been a better mother. So we do see, of course, the bond then strengthening between Kasienka and her mother there. And if you kind of think of forgiveness, it looks like the mother is forgiving her, but in a way it's Kasienka forgiving the mother, of course, maybe for neglecting her and for not being the kind of mother that she needed all those months. And she says very simply then, of course, and for now, that's okay. It's just enough, as she said before. Okay, reunion then, of course, it comes to Kenora, and if you kind of think about it, this is where maybe you get a little bit of the Hollywood ending, where Kenora comes back then to romance Ola, and Ola goes out then in her lovely yellow summer dress. So it's kind of emphasizing the notion here, of course, that at least there's a brighter future for the mother when it comes to relationships, that she's not just left pining then for the husband, of course, who left her. So it's more optimistic and more positive then in terms of that. And it's also giving us a nice kind of, we'd say, neat ending in terms of Kenoro as well. So he's not just gone and that's it. Okay, so he brings the mother then to dinner. Then resurrection. That's quite a good word to use. It's quite a dramatic word to use as well, where it says, Mama is alive again, a little bit alive. She isn't singing, but now and then she hums without meaning to. So it's almost like, in a way, like Kasienka then, she's becoming more like her old self or a new and improved version of her old self. So side by side then, of course, she's emphasizing her friendship with Delilah here. Delilah and I stand together side by side. There's no one in the center. We're just looking out in the same direction, emphasizing a true friendship here. So shared values, shared interests. They respect each other. They have, of course, the same perspectives as such then. So not desperately at one another, fearing betrayal. Okay, so it's not just about that as such then. It's more about just an affinity, we'd say, a bond with another person. That friendship sometimes can be just very easy and very natural. Okay, so an epilogue. Remember, of course, that sometimes in a novel you'll have a prologue at the beginning and an epilogue at the end. An epilogue essentially then, of course, is usually at the end of a play or a novel. Okay, And it is usually, of course, allowing for a little bit of a time lapse. So essentially you might have a few days, you might have weeks, months, years essentially between the ending of the story then, that last chapter, and then the epilogue itself. It's almost like an update essentially most of the time. Okay, so this is entitled Butterfly, and we realise, of course, that this relates back then to the butterfly stroke, which is the most difficult swimming stroke, of course, that you can perform, because you have to use both arms and lift them over your head. So it's very technical. You have to be very disciplined, requires a lot of training, essentially then. It looks kind of beautiful, and of course that's why it's called the butterfly stroke, because it looks like wings, essentially then, kind of both arms moving at the same time. So she says then simply, and this emphasizes how she's advancing when it comes to the sport of swimming as well. I'm breaking out. Miss Morrow is teaching me the butterfly. When I'm in the water, my body moves like a wave. So think of effortlessly, very naturally, very fluidly. There is a violence to it and a beauty. I think violence here just really means strength, essentially. And it's kind of emphasizing the idea that maybe sometimes girls shy away from sport at that particular age of 12 or 13 because they don't want necessarily to look strong and muscular. They want to look pretty and dainty. And she's saying, no, there's something beautiful about the strength itself and kind of proving myself. I lie on my breast, my arms outstretched, my legs extended back, waiting to kick. And I push, pull, recover. This is how the butterfly works. Notice the symbolism there, okay, that she had to, of course, push against all the obstacles that she had in her life. And she had to recover then, of course, from that effort. So it's the idea of overcoming all of the hardships ever since she came to England. And even before that, of course, when she and her mother were abandoned by her father. So she says, I have to hollow out spaces for breathing. If I miss them, I can't swim. And that's sort of the idea, of course, of giving herself enough time to recover as well, being kind to herself, not expecting too much or taking on too much of a burden as well. Maybe sharing that burden with other people, whether it be her mother, whether it be Kenoro, whether it be her father even, we'd say, whether it be Delilah or whether it be William. Allow herself to be vulnerable. She doesn't have to be strong all of the time. But she says then, I know when to come up for air, when to keep my head down. At practice on the starting block, I'm not frightened at all. I'm standing on my own and it never felt so good. So it's emphasizing the idea that being on her own is not a cause for anxiety. She doesn't feel that kind of pressure, essentially, that she has felt throughout the novel. She just feels calm and she feels self-assured. So it's really emphasizing the positivity, and it's really about her story, of course, and the fact that she has overcome so much. So you could just simply say, of course, that it is realistic and convincing then. Maybe we'd say there are too many neat ends towards the end, everything's sort of tied up in a little bow. But if you kind of think about it, sometimes life does work out like that. And I think that's the whole point of the book then as well, kind of exploring identity, who we are and how we overcome difficulties and problems, and how, of course, that relates back then to our traits and characteristics. Okay, so you need to decide, of course, in terms of the ending, is it a satisfying and successful ending? Okay, is there anything that you would change, essentially? Okay, anything you would add or leave out? Would you prefer a more dramatic ending? Do you think that it's true to the book itself? Do you think maybe if they were going to adapt this book, if it were going to become, we'd say, a TV show or a play or a film, would they change the ending? Do they need to change the ending? Do they need sort of like a punchier ending, essentially? Because think about it, it ends in the swimming pool, and that relates back to the title then, The Weight of Water. But remember, of course, that it is that kind of rebirth image, that she's kind of coming out of her shell and proving herself then as a person. Okay, now, if you're asked to write about theme, an obvious theme, of course, could be friendship or love or family. There are lots of different themes that we've mentioned before. I think a very good one to write about, though, is discrimination, because there are so many different examples and so many different types of discrimination in the book. So think about, of course, to discriminate against somebody means to mistreat that particular person because that person is different in some way. So you could use the word intolerance, or you could use the word prejudice perhaps as well. So if you think about it, we have examples of racism, we have examples of sexism, we have examples of bullying, just in general, we have examples of homophobia, and we have examples of xenophobia. Okay, so homophobia, of course, would be discrimination against gay people or LGBT people. You could think of xenophobia then, of course, would be fear of foreigners, okay? Because when you think about it, Kasienka is white and she's still subject then to taunting and bullying because of the colour of her skin. So some people would say, well, that's obviously racism, and other people would say, no, it's more to do with the fact that she's from Poland, really, rather than the fact that she's white. Okay, so it depends on your point of view. You make up your mind, essentially, there. Okay, so I would say your first port of call in terms of discrimination would be at the very beginning when her teacher changes her name, Kasienka, to Cassie. You'll find that quite a lot. We say kind of longer, more difficult names. We say maybe for English or Irish or Scottish or Welsh people to understand. And they would just shorten it just for convenience, just to suit themselves. And remember, the teacher doesn't even ask her if that's okay. She just assumes that that's fine. So she's kind of imposing a different name on her. And think about it, names are important. They're part of your identity, your family, your heritage, who you are, where you come from. People shouldn't just change your name, essentially, just like that, without even asking you. First and foremost, it's just rude, and it is discrimination then as well. Okay, number 2 then, we see that her mother then suffers from the either racism or xenophobia then that she experiences. So remember, she's working in a hospital. She's rejected by a patient in the hospital who simply says in a rather snooty voice, "I'd like someone English, please." And it's described here as the crusty creature snarls. So almost like a hostile animal. It's very threatening, essentially, there. So discriminating against the mother simply because she's not English. Okay, so it'd be an example then of xenophobia. Remember, xenophobia is spelled with an X now. Xenophobia. Remember, we've looked at phobias before. They're irrational fears. Number 3 then, if we take it chronologically as we're moving throughout the novel, would be the boys in her class then. They're speaking in Polish, so the teacher, of course, who is English, doesn't understand, and they're making sexist remarks then about the girls. Kasienka just describes them as being horrible. So they're obviously making very personal comments about their appearance and so on. So that's blatant discrimination there. She says herself then, we've mentioned this before when we're looking at her appearance, no one likes too white. Polish winter white. So she is the subject of ridicule because she has white skin, because she has very pale, sort of snowy skin, essentially. Number 5 then would be the homophobia that we see in the novel. Remember when she and her mother go searching then, asking people about Kasienka's father, there's a man at one particular door then refers to pufters. And a pufter, of course, or puff then, is a derogatory term about a gay man. Okay, so that would be obvious discrimination then, when he kind of sneers that, do you think I'm a pufter, just because they want to ask about a man as such. And remember, of course, then, that she is derided as a lesbian. The word lesbian is used as a derogatory term or a slur, essentially, then, by the other girls because she has short hair. Okay, so that's obviously homophobia there too. Okay, that's number 5. Number 6 then, Kanoro is a cleaner in England, but he originally was a doctor in Kenya. So kind of think about it. When he comes over from Kenya, then surely they should fast track a Kenyan doctor to become an actual doctor in England. You know, why does he have to wait such a long time? Why does he have to do a cleaning job essentially first? And sometimes people can be stuck in those particular jobs for years on end, waiting then to be recognised, waiting to be accepted as a doctor. And even Babsi, of course, makes a comment about how black his skin is, and it seems to be quite disapproving as such as well. And of course, Kasienka is just thankful that she says it in Polish and that Kanoro doesn't actually understand it. Number 7 then, remember that Kasienka herself is not picked for group work because she's regarded as an outsider, and she's ostracised, then alienated at school. And she says simply then, when she moves into year 8 after the exam, no one talks to me at all. And it's kind of emphasising really that they just don't even want to know. They won't even bother to make an effort because she's different, because she's new, essentially there. So that would be your kind of classic bullying then, really, wouldn't it? Okay, number 8 then relates back to a story that was on the radio, and this really shows, of course, the outside world then and the general attitude that some English people would have towards immigrants. So it's reported then that a Croatian builder was on his way home and he was actually attacked with his own hammer. So 3 14-year-olds were actually arrested. This took place in Birmingham, and they shouted during the assault, "Give us back our jobs, Polak." First of all, they're 14. Second of all, he wasn't Polish, he was actually Croatian. And it's sort of this notion, of course, that when immigrants come in, they're stealing English people's jobs. But the whole point is, of course, we know very well that a lot of English people won't do the jobs that a lot of immigrants will actually do. So it's reinforcing then how dangerous and unsafe it can be for immigrants in foreign countries, in England. And a lot of people would actually relate that back, maybe we'd say, to Brexit and the very racist and xenophobic attitude that maybe we'd say Leavers would have. Okay, that was number 8. Number 9 then, think of the obvious bully then throughout the novel. That is Claire. And she sneers, for example, at the intelligent students who win quite a lot then at prize night. She ignores and bullies Kasienka then because Will likes her. In other words, it really emphasizes the idea that she's very insecure and she's also jealous then when it comes to Kasienka and her bond with Will. Remember, Kasienka is told, of course, that she has the wrong hair, that she has the wrong bag. It's really sort of tiny details here. There's a note then that's left in Kasienka's locker saying, "You smell like old meat." Okay, when you're going to think about just these kind of degrading comments as such. And remember that Kasienka describes Claire and the other bullies then as kind of hunters or predators. There is what you like to call the pity club as well. They kind of look down on her and pity her just because she's different, even though she appears to be much more intelligent and much more sophisticated than they are. And remember the point that we mentioned the last day as well, where Claire literally then hacks away at her hair, and you can kind of say, well, that's something that definitely should be reported, and Kasienka shouldn't be lying about that because that's quite serious. I mean, that's a physical assault when you literally think about it. Okay, so it's really sort of emphasizing here that there are lots of different examples of discrimination, and you can kind of group them together in terms of racism and or xenophobia. And then you can look, of course, at, we say, just kind of general bullying maybe that would occur in terms of children resenting outsiders or mistreating outsiders, or just sort of the idea of the new girl coming into well-established cliques or groups that you would have within the school itself, almost like a little hierarchy or kind of like a pyramid system. And then, of course, you have the examples of homophobia then as well. So you could have your sort of like 2 or 3 different groups, and then you would have different examples within those particular groups. And then you have, of course, quotations and references as well. So it's actually quite easy to discuss that particular theme. And you could say, of course, that it's a very realistic theme, okay, because there's a lot of discrimination within society. And there are lots of groups who are mistreated within society. And it's kind of interesting to look at the experience then, of course, of somebody who is coming from, a white girl, for example, who's coming from Poland into English society. You think that she would be integrated into that society, kind of assimilated. You think people would naturally accept her. But simply because she comes from a different country, from Eastern Europe, she speaks a different language, she doesn't look the same as the other girls, she's not a kind of a carbon copy or a clone of them, that therefore she is bullied. Okay, so remember what I said before, you can literally choose any theme at all, but I just think this is a really useful one to do because there are so many different types of discrimination and so many different examples that you can use then from the novel. But if you want to look, we'd say, at the theme of love, there are lots of different examples of romantic love, friendship, remember, familial love as well. You could even look at something like, we'd say, narcissism, the arrogance, patriotism, lots of kind of more extended examples of love there too. So you can focus on your own theme if you want to, or you can focus on this particular theme that I've done today. It really is up to you, okay? And remember that what you choose to focus on, what you choose to learn, and your emphasis The more creative and the more imaginative it is, and the more unique and individual it is to you, the better mark that you will get. Okay, because I will reward you for coming up with fresh ideas, something different and something unique. Right, guys, just watch out now for the emails that I'm going to send, just in terms of advising you and reminding you of what to focus on for your revision for next week. So remember, of course, the novel is your focus, and then I'll send you a list of what you need to emphasize. Take care, guys.